Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing a non-spoiler review for The Unicorn Hunters by Katherine Arden. Most people are familiar with this author's name from The Bear and the Nightingale or the Winter Night trilogy, and for good reason, because that's a very successful and beloved fantasy trilogy. She has such an established authorial voice, and she is really masterful at coupling both fantasy and history together. She clearly does a lot of research and puts a lot of effort into looking into that time and place, trying to make you feel as though you're genuinely transported to that, while also taking into account the lore of whatever time and place she's exploring, and then weaving that in with the magic and with what is transpiring that is unexplainable for our characters. And I think that if you like that idea, or if you liked that in the Winter Night trilogy, you are likely going to, at the very least, appreciate that about the Unicorn Hunters. Additionally, though, I thought that this story had one of the best protagonists I've come across in a long time. I loved this character. I was so invested in her plight, in wanting her to have some semblance of joy in her life, a little bit of happiness. I liked the political intrigue within this. I like the way that she tried to outmaneuver her political rivals. If you don't know anything about the story, getting into the synopsis, I just described it as she's trying to outmaneuver her political rivals, and that is kind of a big way of capturing what's going on. You follow who was a real person in history, Anne of Brittany, though Katherine Arden has made her age just a little bit higher for some of the events of the story. She asks this what if of during a certain time of this woman's life, what if she had just been a little bit older? How would things have possibly played out if that were the case? So you follow Anne of Brittany, a sovereign duchess trying to outmaneuver her political adversaries and resist a marriage that would solidify France's hold on her land and people. And how she goes about trying to outmaneuver them is through, of all things, a unicorn hunt. I think the title of this book and just the concept of unicorns, maybe this is a personal thing, but I think it gives this impression of whimsy. If anything, I would say this leans a lot more into horror. There are some pretty visceral moments throughout the book. There are some very disturbing scenes, and how things are described, they feel unsettling. When I had first picked this up, I was a little bit surprised, but pleasantly so. Not that I would have minded some whimsy, because I love that here and there, but it's definitely much darker. The idea behind the unicorn hunt is that our character is trying as much as possible to buy herself time so that she can figure out a way to avoid this marriage, because she does not want to give over her land to France. It was kind of this last promise she made to her father before he passed away, and she is very determined to ensure that this does not take place. She's also trying to play off of some of the various different ways in which their culture goes about things. So she suggests a unicorn hunt because unicorns are known to exist, but they're very, very rare, and they have really important properties. It's very sought after. And so she kind of plays on that to create a little bit of time so that she can figure out what she's going to do. And so much of the book is her just trying, because the odds are stacked extremely, extremely against her. And it's not like, oh, I have this master plan and we're watching how all of it unfolds, all the dominoes fall. It's not quite like that, because while that can be satisfying to read about, of course, it also is slightly unrealistic because it relies on the plan never being thwarted. And thus this has really high stakes, because every step she makes, she then kind of has to brace herself, reanalyze the situation, and maybe what she was planning to do before, she might have to course correct, or she might have to make a new decision because something changed, and so she now has, rather than this option over here that's been closed off, and she has to figure out a few new additional routes, and then once she pursues one, then we start that process all over again. So if you're a fan of political intrigue, I think this is going to probably work for you. And on that note, I wanted to give what I feel are some comp titles to this. Of course, just because maybe you like some of these doesn't mean it's a one-to-one you're gonna like this, and then maybe you don't love all the ones I'm gonna mention, but even still, I would say if you like anything I've already stated about this, there's still a decent chance you might enjoy it, and I would still recommend it because I thought it was great. But some of the comp titles, I think Spinning Silver is a pretty good one by Naomi Novik. This one also does a great job of blending history and lore together, and very specifically exploring the different customs and cultures of the people at that time. I mentioned The Bear and the Nightingale. That one's obvious, but it's true that if you like that, you might like this. And if you pick up this and you've never read that, you might like that trilogy as well. I also think that Daughter of the Forest is another great one. One, because the protagonists in both of these are wonderful, and they're somewhat similar to one another in that they're very, very determined individuals. They're very resolute. They are very principled. Both of these characters are not fighters. They're not necessarily like physically capable in a lot of ways. They don't have the ability to utilize this awesome magic from a magic system necessarily either. They really have to rely on their wit to try and get by, and also in this book's case, especially because of the historical setting, the kind of assumptions that are made of, or the expectations people have of women in particular, and how she will sometimes play into that, versus when she surprises people, and then based off of that surprise, she is able to do something there as well. We'll get into other things to do with why she's a great protagonist, but if you like Daughter of the Forest, then there's a chance that maybe if you like that specifically about it, you'll like this book as well. Not to mention that both of them, I think, have great writing, slightly different writing styles, but great writing nonetheless. Because of how much I've been complimenting the use of history alongside fantasy, I wanted to also mention Children of Gods and Fighting Men, that if you enjoyed that, there's a chance you'll like this one as well. And then the last two I'm mentioning purely because they really fit within the idea of political fantasy, and that would be The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison, as well as The Counselor. I keep kind of returning to this idea that this is a political historical fantasy, but I really want to emphasize the history part of it, not just because I want people to go in with correct expectations, but because it was so obvious that there was so much effort poured into the creation of this setting for us as the reader. Because the really difficult part about when you base something off of history, whether it be historical fiction or alternate history fantasy, anytime you do this, you have that extra burden of trying to ensure that you are actually factually correct. Now, there are burdens that come with creating an entirely new world. One, that's really difficult to do. You have to think of the ins and outs of everything from culture, customs, religion, hygiene. How do they do anything? What do they eat? While you have all that you have to come up with, and you have to make it cohesive and make sense, at the same time, you don't have to worry about there already being something established that you have to fit within and that you have to really, really well research. So the creativity is difficult, but the other part is kind of one of the pros of if you are just doing something that's fantasy or sci-fantasy. So you have this kind of extra difficulty when it comes to representing history within your historical fantasy. And I, time and time again, while reading this, I thought, I don't know anything. And I really like that feeling in my historical fantasy works, in anything, any kind of history. It doesn't have to be fantasy, but any kind of historical fiction, when I'm taught something new and then I go, wait, was that a real thing? And then you look it up and you're like, oh my gosh, I never knew this before. And then you get to something else and you're like, wait, why did they say that? They said that really strange. Why did they say it like that? I feel like that must have been on purpose. And then you look that up and you learn a new fact. That was constant as I was reading this. And then I discovered, because I was like, I really want to know about the effort that the author put into this. So first off, the author wanted to try and represent this character as best as possible based off of this real figure. So this real figure was younger when the events that this is centered around took place. So obviously there were some decisions made there, but the author was looking into various works about this woman, but a lot of them are in French. So, I mean, she does happen to speak French from what I understand. So she was like, okay, well, I'll just read the French ones instead of trying to find a translated one, because from what I understand, all the French ones are the best ones. So she read a lot of biographies, or read some biographies that were in French, which is awesome. But even just the politics of that time, the complexity of those, the way that the characters speak, the way that their clothing is described, and then especially the lore, all of that, it was so obvious that there was so much effort poured into it. And with the lore in particular, I think at this point, a lot of fantasy readers, if you have something that's vaguely historical and then you're like, and then there were fae, or and then there were these things, and it's like basically fae, but they call them something else, you're just like, got it. Or you have some like vague King Arthur thing mixed in, and you just kind of are like, okay, well, I know this vaguely, and you go into it and you just kind of, you buy it. You buy into it, especially if it's compelling and you like the plot or you like the characters. Not all of us expect everything to be the most historically accurate necessarily, but when that effort is put in, it's appreciated, or I think it should be appreciated, and the lore in particular. I think this is when she shines, because this is when she really, really marries the idea of history and fantasy together. It, I think, invites a level of curiosity into the reading experience, because you consistently find yourself wanting to not only turn the page, but you want to learn more about every single thing that you're reading about. I also found that this is where she wove in the historical elements exceptionally as well, because based off of a lot of modern works, we now have certain things that come to mind when we think of various different mythical beings. Oftentimes we think of them as they live a really long time, they're beautiful, and they also maybe can be like tricksters, but also they are really hot. And this was like, but what if they were terrifying though? What if they are constantly playing with people's lives and ruining people's lives and murdering people, and you're like, oh yeah, that's different. And I know we've seen some of that before. I don't want to act as though she's the first author to have ever explored the darker sides of different mythical peoples, but she just did it so well. There were times I was reading it and I was like, oh my gosh, that's pretty awful. Or you will just have a moment happening and then this person will appear and they will seem dead, and then they'll have certain things on them where you're like, pretty clear what happened to them. Why are they here all of a sudden? Like, there's just moments that kind of you flip out about, and I really liked it. I think this would be a great one to read if you like these sorts of stories in like the fall or the winter. And again, I think this is very true of The Bear and the Nightingale as well. Returning now to Anne, because Anne of Brittany, I have a feeling she was probably awesome in real history, and I actually do want to learn about her more, but her as the protagonist of the story, incredible. I wrote in my notes, I'm kind of kidding, but this feels like monarchy propaganda, because she's so admirable and so rootable and so likable that I was like, I mean, man, if that's what people were like, then I suppose we only need one person making decisions for everyone, because I loved her so much. And I don't literally think that the author is trying to push for that. I just thought that she was an incredible character, and that truly you were like, I really wish that more people who had a lot of other people's lives kind of in their hands, I wish more of them thought about the weight of that, the burden of that, and took it seriously and cared, which she absolutely does. I mentioned that she's also incredibly intelligent and likable, but additionally, she's very, very loving, and kind of unfortunately, she's also very self-sacrificing. You see this with her interactions with her sister. You see everything that she's willing to give up for not only her sister, but for this promise that she made to her late father, and also just for her people. She is always putting herself last, essentially. And the book is exploring, in some ways, the hope that maybe she won't have to. And that was part of why I felt so invested as well, is because I appreciated how much she cared about everyone else. And I also think that the story does a good job of recognizing she has so much more than the average person as well. So in that way, she's privileged, but also she's incredibly trapped based off of politics. And so I was like, I mean, I want her to carve out a little pocket of happiness for herself, and maybe it'd be temporary, and I'd prefer if it was long term. Can it be long term? I really want this for her. And as a result, I think that it made the stakes feel a lot higher. It's not like apocalyptic style of stakes, but you want this character to have some semblance of joy in their life. And I think a fair way to describe her also is that she's soft but formidable. She's one of those characters who you don't necessarily want to cross her. You likely aren't going to be able to deceive her. I thought she was absolutely amazing. And just kind of as a side note, this is not fantasy romance. It is not romantasy. However, it has a romantic subplot in it, and I thought the romantic subplot was very, very well written, but I don't want to say anything else about it because I don't want to spoil anything. The last thing that I want to compliment about this is the writing. I do think that there is a formality to the writing in a sense. It's definitely not casual. It doesn't feel modern by any means, but I thought the formality was very, very beautiful. It wasn't stiff by any means, in my opinion at least. And I thought it was fitting of the story being told because of the fact that I think a lot of us, when we go into these sorts of books, there are certain expectations depending on the goal the author has for the story. If the story is meant to be set in this time and place, but it's also meant to be kind of campy and funny, then it makes sense that the writing style would match that. And because the story is meant to be a little bit more serious, there's a somber nature to it. Already described a bunch of reasons why it's also somewhat horrifying as well. As a result of that, I think by having this slight formality, I think it enhanced the feeling of the story. It enhanced the setting and it enhanced the characters as well. They felt believable within this context and this setting. Obviously, if you're not into political intrigue, if you don't like historical fantasy, if you prefer a set magic system, then maybe this isn't going to be the book for you, and that's completely fine. But if anything I've said about it sounds like something that would fit your taste, I would highly recommend giving it a try. I also quite enjoyed the audiobook. I read a mix of both the audio and the physical, so I would recommend that. But it's nice to do a combination of both, I think, because some of the words that are used to describe certain things, like, for example, some of the lore-oriented things, I would have never known how they were spelled at all based off of the pronunciation. So it was kind of nice to be able to have those things. But I really, truly, I can't recommend this enough. I thought it was great. If you are interested in checking it out, I'll have it linked. If you've read it, feel free to let me know your thoughts. If you're interested in reading it, let me know that as well. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.